Kanhoji Angre, and more surprised that not every Indian knows about him. Someone so brilliant needs everyone, every Indian needs to know about him. What we can see in Kanhoji, there was a great reinvestment back into his people. It was basically farmers, salt panners, fishermen who were given good cash opportunities by working in his navy and in his army during the war season, and this greatly increased the amount of wealth that was being passed around in the area. To the point that he had to mint his own silver coins because he was making so many payments. He started minting. He started having to mint his own coins, and this had a compounding effect amongst the lowest echelons of society. I myself was very surprised to find Kanhoji Angre, and more surprised that not every Indian knows about him. And it kind of became my agenda that someone so brilliant needs every Indian needs to know about him.
In fact, when you were talking about him and his strategies, talking about strategy and how to fight in a war, whether it is with the Chinese, whether it is, to make it expensive for the other side, if you can't let them into your border. I think these are strategies which our next generation should see. What did our leaders do? What did our forefathers do? I think it's amazing that you have brought this back into the forefront. I'll start with the Q&A. Mr. Shmuel, would you like to ask?
Yes, thank you very much on a very interesting presentation. And I want to ask you next question. How lessons from experience of Kanhoji can support us in improvement well-being of poor and low socioeconomic groups of population?
Well, I think the greatest takeaway is that, currently we are faced with a massive discrepancy. We have a very small number of extremely wealthy people. And unfortunately, in, India, we have a large population of very, very, economically backward people because of lack of opportunity, lack of education. And so I think we have to, as a government, always first focus on the basics of providing jobs and opportunity, nutrition and education, to the masses. And what we can see in Kanhoji, there was a great reinvestment back into his people. It was basically farmers, salt panners, fishermen who were given good cash opportunities by working in his navy and in his army during the war season, and this greatly increased the amount of wealth that was being passed around in the area, to the point that he had to mint his own silver coins because he was making so many payments. He started minting. He started having to mint his own coins, and this had a compounding effect amongst the lowest echelons of society. And I think by providing more jobs, and of course, to be able to do those jobs, not only do we need education, but we need things like nutrition, natal nutrition, prenatal nutrition, nutrition for the mothers. And of course, we have midday meal programs. I think they should be spread not just to South India, but to the whole country. Actually, in South India, we can see that, our numbers are excellent. The state governments are doing a great job in, providing midday meals, and the demographics, point to that. Just every demographic in South India is. And I think the whole country can take a lesson from this.
Thank you very much.
Just as a point of discussion, Kanhoji used a lot of fishermen and a lot of people in those areas for getting information, is Mr. Sohail.
Yes.
So, and he was also fair and loyal.
Yes, he was fair, loyal, and he brought a cash economy by minting these coins, and it has a compounding effect. So once he had a policy of, if you were injured or killed in battle, the family would get a kind of a pension. If you lost your leg or your arm, which was unheard of, for that time. It was just considered a waste. The person is taking a risk. But he had this pension policy where if you were injured or killed in battle, your family, was able to still survive without that earning member, and basically creating more wealth at that level is just providing sustenance. The reason why he was also not keen on battle is that the people who suffer during battles are usually the farmers, or the fisher folk, because the armies trample through their crops. And when the armies come, they're usually foraging off the local farmers. So this pacifist, it was not a pacifist policy, but he was very mindful that the people who are providing the revenue, as in the tax revenue, the riots, the lowest, income bracket. And if they are not well taken care of, then neither is there any revenue being generated, because, destruction of crops, inability for fishing boats to go out and harvest the sea. So that way he was, very practical, and it was creating a space where he allowed that the class of people that were generating the food and the crops and all the agricultural produce to continue so in peace.
Also, you said, spent his money for the society and for the well-being, like building forts, shipbuilding. This also must have had a ripple effect in the society in terms of creating an economy out there. In addition to what you just said, that he started the pension system. Most people lose their livelihoods when dies, where they have medical issues. This is what you have covered in ensuring the underprivileged are not going to further darkness. But he's also spent a lot on forts and shipbuilding, which must have built the economy around there.
In a very big way, because it provided employment. And the other thing is, the geography of the Konkan. It's a narrow strip on the Western Ghats. So the water, just during the monsoon and afterwards, is flooding, and there are literally hundreds of small rivulets, all across the Ghat. So it's actually sometimes easier to go up the Ghat, travel there, and then come down the Ghat again. He did a lot of bridge building, which connected people not only for their produce, but to move around and to transport their goods also. At that time, most people there was an inflated like stomach or something, like something like a balloon or a pot, which people used to hold on to cross rivers. But of course, you can't move goods, like that. So his shipbuilding was not only for war, but also for the transportation of goods, transportation of people. So he was able to unite the economy, able to hasten transportation of agricultural goods, and of course the employment that goes in these infrastructure projects.
Another thing is Mr. Kanhoji's story taught in schools around Maharashtra or Gujarat?
Very briefly, he's hardly mentioned in a couple of lines, and that is in Maharashtra, not outside of Maharashtra. But I think, in the past few years, this is growing, and I hope it gets included into our textbooks, because generally, I think if you remember from our own schooling, the effort, I mean, the focus was always on the empire, it was on Delhi. And the other parts of India, especially the Deccan, were largely ignored. So we have a lot of people from the Deccan, from the south, from the east, that have been ignored in our narrative, because the focus has always been on Delhi and the empires, or whoever, sat, in the gaddi of Delhi. So I think, we are a very massive, diverse country, as diverse as Europe. Now, if you look at England, it is no larger than Karnataka. But look at the focus on their history. You literally have hell of a lot of material coming in from every battle has been researched, shows have been made many times over. So I think there is a great space, whether it is Chhatrapati Shivaji, Kempe Gowda, or Hukka Bukka, Vijayanagar Empire, that we have to, I hope, our writers, our filmmakers really go into it, and it can be done from several angles, and we need to focus really on our own history, unearth it, revive it, otherwise it's just a lost treasure.
Are there any books, serials, or movies made on Kanhoji?
No, not yet. I mean, there is my book, and then Manohar Gaunkar had written a book in the 50s called The Sea Hawk. So, that is why, which was a history book. So, that is the space I saw, that someone like Kanhoji Angre, who needs to be a national figure, how do you get to spread, knowledge about him and about his example? So, I think we as writers have to do a lot more research, and I think it is growing. Even children's book writers are now writing about Indian subjects, and I think it's a great move forward.
Is it, people say that the Britishers did not win against the Mughals, but actually the Marathas. So is that correct? And if so, for how long were the Marathas holding power?
The Marathas were dominant for quite some time. And see, actually, the Mughals, after the last 1707, last powerful Mughal was Aurangzeb. After the demise of Aurangzeb, his sons and grandsons were only emperors in name. And you had regions like the Sayyid brothers, or the Asaf Jah and people like that, who were in charge. And at one point, it was the Marathas who were, protecting the Mughal family. So, of course, yes, the British did not, I mean, there was no Mughal empire. It had crumbled to pieces. And what there was a Maratha confederacy that had dominance over most parts of India, right from Bengal to the northwest and coming all the way down to Bangalore and Tanjore even.
So which period was this?
This was in the end of the Peshwa period. So we are talking about the late 18th century, 1790s and around then. So around 70 years after Kanhoji Angre.
What about, we were known for shipbuilding, they said. So anything on that and from this period?
We have a tradition of sailing, that goes back to the Indus period. And, Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal has headed a project where they have made a stitch ship, which is, sailed to Oman. So, actually now in the southern Arabian Peninsula, they have found actually ancient Harappan trading sites and settlement sites. So we have a great history of shipbuilding, which we really need to focus on now. Of course, our shipbuilding was primarily in wood, but it's something that is indigenous. It's something that we have a great skill and experience in over millennia. And I think we, of course, now, it's welding and all that, but it's something India really needs to focus on because, China has a stranglehold on shipping. And we really need to focus on this shipping tradition. And we can see how we were able to innovate and, take this brown water navy and defeat and subjugate blue water navy. And, had, I think, stayed on for a longer period, or, the Angles themselves had not had the issue, we would have been able to dominate the whole Arabian Sea area, which is now, of course, where all our oil comes in. And I think our navy is quite focused on.
In the Mughal times, you see, it was feudatory times, and there were the different nawabs and all who have, the confederation has disintegrated and the Britishers have taken. So what is the history between that area, Maharashtra, that area, the coast, to Portuguese, to Britishers? What is the line of control? I mean, what happened? How did it move?
Well, actually, earlier on, before the Portuguese came, before the Deccan Sultanates came, there was various kingdoms, the Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas in this region. And the Portuguese took over the Konkan from the Bijapur Sultanate. And of course, they were constantly fighting the Bijapur Sultanate, the Ahmednagar Sultanate for domination of these areas. So, the Portuguese came here a very long time ago, and there's this church close by. I'm currently in Mumbai, in Bandra, which is 50 years older than the Taj Mahal. And people find that hard to believe, but it's a fact. So they've had long presence. They were the first to come and the last to leave, the Portuguese. So they had, by the time Kanhoji was around, 200-year presence on the Konkan coast. But this was, of course, taken over by, they had taken over from either the Bijapur Sultanate or from the Rajas in Kerala and Malabar. So, the kind of chain of command is from the sultanates, who these sultanates also provided a great, they were a highly syncretic society. People talk about the Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb of North India, but actually you will find the greatest syncretism of culture in the Deccan. And they successfully fought the Mughals and delayed Mughal advance into it. Kind of gave, Chhatrapati Shivaji's grandfather, Maluji Bhosle himself, was fighting against, the Mughals 50, 60 years prior to that period, when he was with the Bijapur and the Ahmednagar Sultanate. And of course, Shahaji Bhosle was the Senapati of the Bijapur Sultanate. But Shivaji was able to carve out his own kingdom.
So Portuguese were there 200 years prior to Mr. Kanhoji Angre.
Yes, yes. For 200 years, they had been in dominance, and then Kanhoji was able to subjugate them. They did not entirely leave, but then the British came into dominance.
There is one more question. Are there any records? This is from Adil Desai. Are there any records of Portuguese ships being taken over by Angre, and what happened to them after he died?
Oh, no, they are not, no preserved ships. Earlier on, they used to make the ships out of European oak, and they did not have a very long lifetime. When they came to India, of course, we're the source of the greatest hardwood in the world. We have teak, sal, rosewood, the works, but basically teak was used. And of course, then the life of the ships greatly increased. Kanhoji successfully took over several, not only Portuguese galleons, carracks, men of war, but also swifter and slightly smaller English vessels. None of them have survived. Wood, especially in this humid climate, it does not survive. And it has a limited, what is left are stone cannons. His dockyard outside Vijaydurg can still be seen on Google Maps, but there are no, waters are also very warm, so everything gets kind of recycled, if you can say. So unfortunately, we have no old vessels in existence.
When they say that Kanhoji Angre used a strategy of layering with the forts, what do you mean by that? Like
Layering?
the forts strategically.
So, he had that time a telescope, what is called a spyglass, had a distance of around 30 kilometers. He had a fort right down the coast every 30 kilometers. So one fort was always could see. He had a system of signals using these, like rockets, like how we use during Diwali. So, a similar system that was used to communicate. And he started constructing fort complexes. So earlier on, it was just a single fort. Then he would build a fort on the mainland if the fort was island fort. Sometimes a complex of 2 or 3 forts. Yeah. And this became quite the norm, where he was able to protect, various sides of, the fort. He also, absolute genius. He built a wall in the sea in Vijaydurg. So he literally had, quite modern technology for the age, a wall built in the sea. So when ships approached, they would get, stuck on that wall. So they could not come close enough to fire their cannon. It was quite a architectural feat and engineering feat, but he did this, in the 1700s. So it's quite fascinating.
Somewhere around the world, people used forts up to the 17th century, right? And they became unnecessary after that. Was the period correct? Am I correctly talking about the periods? And then what happened? Why did forts become unnecessary after that?
Because of firepower, firepower and siege technology. Basically, in today's day and age, cannons or weapons or whatever guns you have, artillery guns. A wall does not provide the security. So now we are not that interested in making forts. Earlier on, you protected your citizens. Also, they took refuge in the fort. People lived around in villages around the forts, and when there was an attack or something, they would come and seek refuge in the forts. But today, with our kind of weaponry, it's become kind of meaningless. So after the 18th century, you see that in the First World War, or even in the Napoleonic Wars, by that time, cannon power had become so phenomenal that the fort had lost meaning. You could just take these massive cannons up to the fort wall and breach them. And of course, then dynamite came, and that absolutely changed the equation.
Okay. And there's another question here. Did Kanhoji Angre fly the flag of Marathas in Andamans and Nicobar Island?
No, I have never come across this at all. But I must say, there's a very interesting fact that Tamil author, I forget his name now, unfortunately, had written about. There's a whole, swashbuckling series written in Tamil, many, many decades ago about Kanhoji Angre. Of course, not all of it is based in history. He's using Kanhoji Angre as a character. So maybe in that there is some reference to that, but in historicity, no. He never. The Marathas were not involved in the Andamans. At that time, the Andamans, they may have a strategic, need now, but at that time, there is no agriculture. The most important thing is agriculture and population. You have to have the people to either farm the land or to fish the seas. So, that was
So,
the economy, the basis of the economy was that.
how were the Lakshadweep Islands used by the Portuguese, British, and the Angles?
The Angrias never ventured that far. They never needed to. They realized that they had to control the coast and the sea routes coming into the large entrepots on the western coast.
It's good to talk about our local heroes, and I wish that if there are speakers across the country who would like to speak about the local heroes of their area, I wish we could host more such talks. Thank you so much. And there is a participant, T.N. Mahesh, who was talking about the author you suggested. It's the writer Sandilyan.
Sandilyan, thank you, Mahesh sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Sandilyan, yes.
Do you
Hope everyone reads.
I think you unmuted me for me to speak.
Yeah,
I fell in love with the character Angre. I came across Kanhoji Angre only through Sandilyan. His novels were okay. There was some, he referred mostly Manohar Malkum. He has written about Angre, and I went to libraries and got through his books. And his description of Sindhudurg, Vijayadurg, etc., everything was as it is mentioned by Manohar Malkum. That's the way it is.
Right.
So I am also basically Maratha. And our forefathers came here along with Shivaji when he came down to southern Tamil Nadu. And we are very few people, some packets, Marathas are there here. I can speak Maratha. So I have always romanticized about the Marathas under Shivaji, and really, Shivaji is a hero to me. Kanhoji also is a hero to me. Really, like that.